No Longer Human is a 1948 novel by the Japanese author Osamu Dazai. Dazai was born in northern Japan in 1909, the eighth son of a landowning politician. His interest in literature developed early, but in 1927, when his literary idol, a distinguished short story writer, took his own life, he fell into despair. Thereafter, he made many attempts to end his own life, succeeding on the fifth attempt in 1948, just a few days before what would have been his 39th birthday. This review contains spoilers. No Longer Human is usually considered to be an existentialist classic, a profound depiction of the near universal phenomenon of psychological estrangement in modern society. However, I'm going to argue that that's wrong. It's actually about something else. The plot, as critics usually present it, runs something like this. A young man called Yozo is born into a wealthy family, and he comes to believe early on in life that he can't fit in. He resorts to clowning around because it makes him congenial to others. It doesn't work on everyone, though. Occasionally, someone sees through the facade, and that terrifies him. He's highly intelligent and very good looking, which gains him lots of female attention. At university, he's befriended by an obnoxious young man called Hariki, who introduces him to drinking, smoking, and prostitutes. He becomes attached to a married woman, and after all his money is spent, he enters into a pact with her whereby they'll drown themselves at sea. He survives, she doesn't. The tragedy destroys his reputation, and his family distance themselves from him. No sooner does he begin to find his feet again than Hariki reappears and induces him to start drinking heavily. He becomes attached to several young women, but always leaves them. Am I an egoist, he asks at one point, or am I the opposite, a man of excessively weak character? The reader doesn't know either. Though I have always made it my practice to be pleasant to everyone, he also says, I have not once actually experienced friendship. He becomes an alcoholic, after which a sympathetic pharmacist persuades him, with predictable consequences, that morphine might effect a cure. In the end, he's consigned to a mental hospital, where he concludes, I had now ceased utterly to be a human being. What ultimately becomes of him, we don't know. The story is presented in the form of notebooks published by an unnamed author a decade after the events described. And that's the conventional reading. Yozo is a kind of everyman, a paradigm of the sensitive individual immersed in the hideous impersonality of modern life. Except that he's not, because what I've left out of my short summary is what critics usually omit or pass over desultorily, which is that Yozo is the victim of prolonged systematic sexual abuse in childhood. He mentions it only briefly in the first notebook, where he identifies the perpetrators as maids and manservants. However, the intensity of his emotion there, and his apparent difficulty in bringing it up at all, speaks volumes. He keeps it to himself, as children often will, even well into adulthood, and he doesn't mention it in any of the later notebooks. But that doesn't undermine its importance. On the contrary, it's evidence to show how effectively he's repressed it. We now know the effect such a thing can have on a person, how it can wreck everything. Of course, that does make No Longer Human rather less universal than is usually being claimed. Yozo is not an everyman. He's the victim of a very specific crime, one to which most people, no matter how alienated they may feel by modern society, haven't fallen prey. To suggest that his trajectory is somehow unrelated to that is to belittle it. And I'll leave you to decide what to make of all that. After all, I may be wrong.